What would you do if you traveled thousands of miles to start your married life, only to discover your husband ice living with another woman? By the time Melissa reached apartment 15B in Orchard Road, the ring she carried would still be in her purse and her world would be shattered beyond recognition. This is true story of Melissa Fernandez, a 29-year-old nurse from Manila whose dream of reuniting with her husband in Singapore became a nightmare she never saw coming. Before we dive into this shocking story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Ya won't believe where this goes. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. It all started 6 months ago when Melissa thought she'd found her happily ever after. Melissa Fernandez, 29, a dedicated nurse at the Philippine General Hospital in Manila. Life hadn't been kind to her. She became the head of her family at just 19 after a tragic accident took both her parents. She raised her two younger siblings, putting their needs before her own. Strong, independent, but always yearning for one thing: companionship, a love to call her own, someone to share the life she'd built from the ground up. David Tan, 35, a successful tech consultant from Singapore. He met Melissa during a medical mission in Tacloban shortly after Typhoon Haiyan devastated the region. He was charming, successful, and spoke perfect English and Tagalog. He told Melissa he was single, ready to settle down, and that she was everything he had been waiting for. For months, they shared stories, laughs, dreams. It felt like destiny had brought them together. David promised Melissa a life of comfort, a fresh start in Singapore. Painted a picture of their future, a life of happiness and stability. And so Melissa believed in that promise. She left her family, her life in Manila, and boarded a flight to Singapore, filled with hope. Little did she know, the man she trusted so deeply was hiding something unimaginable. But when she arrived in Singapore, everything she thought she knew about him and her future began to unravel. It started with a 12-day medical mission in the wake of Typhoon Haiyan. Melissa, a dedicated nurse, and David, a logistics coordinator, working side by side amidst devastation. It wasn't just the long days or the emotional toll that brought them closer. It was the deep late-night conversations they shared. They spoke about family, about loss, to people who had known pain and heartache. David shared his own struggles, while Melissa penned up about raising her siblings after their parents' tragic death. In that moment, Melissa found something she had longed for: a connection. David stayed 5 extra days after the mission ended, wanting to spend more time with Melissa. She felt her heart open, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was a connection like no other. 7 months later, their bond grew stronger each day, bringing them closer through video calls, texts, and shared dreams. David's promises were unwavering. He talked about building a life together, about the future they could have. It was clear to Melissa she was falling in love. And then one day in November, on her birthday, the moment she had been waiting for arrived. David asked her a question she'd been longing to hear. The proposal delivered over a video call was everything she had hoped for. The next chapter of her life seemed perfect. She was ready to leave everything behind and start fresh with the man she trusted with her heart. But what Melissa didn't know was that the life she was about to start was already tainted by a secret she couldn't see coming. As Melissa's excitement grew, so did the small but persistent doubts. David's calls always came from Theophis. Never once did she hear the sound of his voice in a place that felt like home. A strange detail, but Melissa brushed it off. After all, he was busy, and that's what successful people did, right? He never showed her where he lived. It was always just his face, professional, polished, in front of an nondescript background. It was normal, or at least it seemed normal. And then came the excuses. David refused to come to Manila for the wedding. He blamed it on work visa complications. A reasonable explanation, she thought, considering how much time and effort put into his career. He insisted on a quick civil ceremony in Singapore instead. No frills, no fuss, just that wow of them beginning their new life. At first, Melissa was relieved. It was simple, no stress. But now, looking back, it was almost as if he was rushing everything. His social media was surprisingly sparse. Nothing about their relationship. No pictures of the two of them together. No romantic gesture shared with his followers. It felt off, but Melissa was too in love to wrap it up in the dream to notice the growing distance. Small things, little red flags beginning to accumulate, but Melissa couldn't see them. Love can blind us to truth, and she was about to walk straight into a storm. As she boarded the plane to Singapore, the excitement bubbling inside her, she had no idea that the life she thought she was building was already falling apart. Melissa had fought so hard for this moment, after everything she'd been through, raising her siblings after the tragic loss of her parents, working double shifts to support them, never allowing herself to dream for long. This was finally her turn to be happy. Feuding was small, just a civil ceremony in January, quick and simple. But to Melissa, it was everything. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that sealed her new life. After the ceremony, Melissa returned to Manila, needing time to process everything to make sure all her location papers were in order. It was supposed to be a temporary separation, just a few months before she would join David in Singapore permanently. But what was meant to be a short time apart turned into 8 long isolating months. 8 months of waiting, of planning, of uncertainty. But as Melissa counted down days to finally moving to Singapore permanently, David was hiding a secret that would destroy everything. June 20 to 4. After months of waiting, Melissa finally arrived in Singapore, 2 suitcases in tow and a heart brimming with hope. In her hand, she carried a gift, an upgraded wedding ring she had bought with her own savings, a symbol of her love, her sacrifice, and her belief in a future with David. As for million to hundred of her hard-earned money, now on offering to the man she had trusted with everything. She expected him to bother, waiting for her, just as he promised. The reunion she had dreamed of for so long. A moment that was supposed to be filled with joy and relief. But as minutes ticked by, there was no David, no warm embrace, no joyful reunion. Just the hum of the busy airport and the growing weight of uncertainty. Melissa waited and waited. But little did she know, this moment would be the beginning of a new reality. One that would unravel everything she thought she knew about love and trust. Minutes pass and still no David. Melissa's heart begins to race, confusion slowly creeping in. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This was supposed to be their moment, his moment to greet her, to finally start the life they'd been planning for months. And then, as if out of nowhere, a woman appeared. Nicole Hartman, a 32-year-old Australian, market executive, friendly enough, but there was a nervous edge to her tone. Her smile was warm, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Melissa's gut tightened with a quiet unease. This was the first shock in a series of events that would turn everything she believed about her life in Singapore upside down. What Melissa didn't know was that this encounter would open the door to reality she wasn't prepared to face. As they drive through the streets of Singapore, the city's towering buildings and bright lights reflecting off the windows, Melissa can't shake the uneasy gnawing at her. Nicole was talking too much, more than seemed necessary. She was overly chatty, her voice a little too bright, her words almost too harsh. She avoided eye contact, her gaze flickering to the rearview mirror rather than meeting Melissa's eyes directly. David, who had promised to pick her up himself, now had an emergency meeting. It didn't add up. The more Nicole spoke, the more Melissa felt like something wasn't right. They drove deeper into Orchard Road, Singapore's most expensive district. It should have been reassuring, a sign that David was settling in well, that their new life together was starting with comfort. Melissa's heart races as she realizes they're heading to a place she doesn't recognize. The address David had promised was miles away from here. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture that was forming made no sense. Melissa was standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite to understand, but her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. And as the door opened, the truth was about to come crashing down. Little did Melissa know, the moment she stepped out of that car would set the stage for a shocking discovery that would shatter everything she thought she knew about David. As they walked towards the entrance, the silence between them felt heavier than it should have. Melissa's mind buzzed with questions, but she couldn't bring herself to ask them just yet. Nicole, however, was determined to fill the quiet. In that split second, Melissa noticed that Nicole's face going pale, her body stiffening. It was as if her words had struck a nerve. She could feel it, the shift in the air between them, as if something had just been said that neither of them could take back. The smile that had been so practiced now seemed to falter, the tension in the air palpable. Nicole's unease was no longer just noticeable, it was undeniable. Melissa was no fool. She could feel the unease radiating from Nicole, but more importantly, she could sense the truth starting to slip out of reach. There was something Nicole wasn't saying, and Melissa was beginning to realize that what she had walked into was not the life she had been promised. Unanswered questions continued to swirl in her mind as she followed Nicole inside. But what awaited her behind the closed doors would be the shocking revelation she never saw coming. They arrive at the luxury condo building, a far cry from humble, modest life Melissa had imagined for herself and David. The building was stunning, impressive, the kind of place someone in David's position could easily afford. But something felt off about this pristine setting. As they neared the elevator, Nicole's movement slowed. She was acting different now. Her usual chatter had stopped. Now there was only silence and fear. In that moment, Melissa knew something was terribly wrong. Nicole's face twisted with emotion, an emotion that made Melissa's heart sink even further. Those words shattered the fragile peace Melissa had been clinging to. A mistake. What did she mean? What mistake could possibly explain David's absence, the secrecy, and the mounting tension she had felt ever since stepping off that plane? Nicole's silence spoke volumes, but it wasn't enough to answer the one question Melissa needed to be answered. Where was David? With Nicole's tears as the only sound between them, Melissa was about to learn the truth she had never imagined, one that would destroy everything she thought she knew about her husband. The elevator doors opened, and with each step they took toward apartment 15B, Melissa could feel the weight of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Something had shifted. There was no turning back. Now inside was a fully furnished home decorated with love. Family photos lined the walls, each frame a carefully curated memory. But as Melissa's eyes scanned the room, her gaze froze on the pictures. Pictures of David and Nicole together, happy in love, sealed in time. And then the most shocking revelation. Wedding photos, not just any wedding, but a beach ceremony in Bali, a wedding that wasn't hers. Melissa's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't just seeing images. She was seeing the truth she had been too afraid to believe now laid bare before her. The truth finally revealed in the most heart-wrenching way. Nicole, the woman who had greeted her with a forced smile, was not just a stranger. She was the one thing Melissa never expected. David's wife. In that moment, everything Melissa had known, everything she had believed about her life in Singapore crumbled. The future she thought she was walking into was nothing more than a lie, a cruel, calculated betrayal. With her world shattering around her, Melissa stood in that apartment, the life she had dreamed of slipping away before her eyes. The man she trusted had built a web of deception, and now Melissa was trapped in the heart of it. Melissa's world shattered in that instant. Every dream, every plan she had made for their future together crumbled like dust in her hands. The weight of the ring box, once a symbol of hope, felt suffocating now. A reminder of everything she had lost in a heartbeat. To marriage certificates, to wives, one man. The room spins as pieces begin to fall into place. But the picture they form is even more twisted than either woman could have imagined. Both women bound by love and lies now faced the unthinkable. David had somehow managed to keep them both in that ark, and the truth of his deceit was just beginning to unravel. But the truth was even more twisted than either woman could imagine. The silence between them is unbearable. Two women, both betrayed, both confused, each trapped in a web of lies spun by the same man. 3 years. That's how long Nicole had been living alley, and in those 3 years, Melissa had been in a parallel existence, waiting for the man who promised her a future, only to find him missing in action when she needed him most. They share their stories, slowly piecing together the disturbing parallels. Both had been kept at a distance, kept in the dark about each other's existence. David had promised both of them the same future, spun the same lies, and manipulated the minto, believing they were his one true love. David still hasn't appeared. The phone rings unanswered, and each time it goes to voicemail. The weight of Thessalons grows heavier, as if he's vanishing into thin air. And with each unanswered call, the truth becomes clearer. David isn't just absent. He's disappeared, leaving to women to pick up the pieces of the shattered life compromised them both. Neither woman knew what came next, but they were both about to find out. And the twists of this betrayal were far from over. Nicole's story was one of love, trust, and ultimately devastating betrayal. She spoke in a soft, almost hollow tone as began to unravel the tale she hadn't believed to be her happily ever after. The whirlwind romance began almost instantly. What started as casual conversations at the conference quickly turned into something deeper, something neither of them could deny. With an air, Nicole and David were married. Nicole moved from Sydney to Singapore, ready to start fresh with the man she had given her heart to. But even as the dream of their new life unfolded, cracks started to show. David's frequent absences were justified as business trips, but as the months wore on, Nicole started feeling more like a stranger in her own life, alone in a new country with no one to turn to. She began to question the truth behind his travels. And so Nicole continued to build her life around the man she thought was her soulmate, blind to the truth lurking just beneath the surface. But that trust, built on promises and lies, was about to shatter completely. Two women, each with their own dreams and sacrifices, now bound by the same man and the same devastating betrayal. And as the layers of deceit began to peel away, the truth of David's manipulation will be far more twisted than either of them could have ever imagined. Melissa met David in 2023 during the relief efforts after Typhoon Haiyan. He was kind, helpful, and exactly the kind of person she needed after everything she had been through. He claimed to be single, never married a man who seemed as eager to build a future as she was. David told her he lived alone, that his parents had passed away, and that he was ready for a fresh start. It felt like destiny. He promised he would bring her over to Singapore once all the paperwork cleared. And in January 2024, Melissa and David married in a small civil ceremony in Singapore. It was supposed to be the beginning of their life together, a fresh chapter, but that crack started to form almost immediately. David had a pattern, and it wasn't just with Nicole. He kept both marriages separate, using business trips as his cover. When he told Nicole he was in Kuala Lumpur, he was actually in Manila with Melissa. When he told Melissa he was working on projects in Indonesia, he was in fact with Nicole in Singapore. He maintained a complete lives, each woman kept in the dark about the other, each believing she was Theon. Nicole, desperate for answers, began her own investigation. The pieces were starting to fit together, but that truth was more complicated and more disturbing than she could have imagined. When he told Nicole he was in Kuala Lumpur, David had actually been in Manila with Melissa, and when he claimed to be in Jakarta for work, he was spending time in Singapore with Nicole. The lies were endless, woven into the thievery fabric of his existence. David had been meticulous, no credit card transactions, no receipts, everything paid in cash, leaving no trace, no evidence. It was the perfect cover for the perfect crime. As the investigation ended, Nicole unearthed something even more unsettling. 6 months ago, David had asked her to add her name to a life insurance policy. To policies, 2 women. Each one offered the same promise, the same safety net for the future. But the truth was far darker than either woman could have imagined. The depth of Nicole's pain became evident as she spoke, the weight of her sacrifices finally coming to the surface. David had preyed on their vulnerability, exploiting their isolation and need for connection. He had played them against each other, keeping them both in the dark, feeding them promises while lining his pockets with their trust. Then the phone rang. The one thing they had both been waiting for, dreading David's call. David's response never came. The call cut off abruptly, leaving both women in a stunned silence. David had disappeared, leaving nothing but lies in his wake. But Nicole and Melissa were about to discover that bigamy was only the beginning of his crimes. After their worlds were torn apart by David's lies, Nicole and Melissa took the only step they could, reporting him to the authorities. The Singapore police force, led by Detective Raymond Lim, was their last hope for finding the truth. But when they first met him, his reaction was colder than they had anticipated. But as the details kept emerging, something shifted. He stopped flipping through his notes and focused intently on them. Insurance policies, the very honest David had convinced. Both women tossing up for policies that could have obviously been used for something much darker than anyone had anticipated. Detective Lim quickly pulled on the thread of David's financial web. It didn't take long for him to uncover that the man who had gone by David Tan had many names. Names that spanned across Southeast Asia. There were multiple licenses, bank accounts in 3 countries, and transactions that didn't add up. David Tani Ming, as his real name revealed, wasn't just a man with 12 wives. He was a man who had been using his charm and lies to manipulate his way across borders, leaving a trail of financial destruction in his wake. Among the many files, one search caught Lim's untraceable poison staging accidents abroad and insurance payout timely in Singapore. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together in a way that no one could have predicted. Detective Lim brought in a file that would change everything. His expression was colder now, the weight of his findings heavy in the air. David hadn't this before, and the pattern was horrifying. A woman he had once promised the world to gone under mysterious circumstance, with the payout lining his pockets. Nicole had found something that would change everything. David's secondary phone forgotten in the apartment was a treasure trove of damning evidence. David wasn't just a bigamist. He was planning something far darker. The boat trip was not just a vacation. It was the means to an end. Detective Lim, following the breadcrumb trail, found another troubling connection. Bangkok. It was tied to another case. David Tan had a history. A story of death and insurance payouts, each woman a stepping stone in his dangerous game. It was clear now David had been using them both as pawns in his twisted game. But there was a chance to catch him before it was too late. David had taken the bait. The trap was set, but David Tan was always one step ahead. And what happened that night on the Marina Bay Sands rooftop would change everything. 57 floors above Singapore, the Marina Bay Sands rooftop bar gleamed with luxury, its sleek, modern design offering the perfect setting for a confrontation that had been months in the making. Melissa arrived at 8:45 p.m., her nerves taut, but her resolve unshaken. Beneath her calm exterior, she was wearing a wire, ready to take down the man who had shattered her life. Undercover officers were positioned throughout the bar, and Detective Lim, with Nicole at his side, watched intently from the surveillance van. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was wait. 9:30 p.m. David Tan walked in like he owned the place, dressed to impress in a designer suit. His smile, a perfect mask for the man he truly was. He spotted Melissa across the room, and without missing a beat, he made his way to her. David sat down, the charm in his voice as smooth as ever. He tried to tell you a story that only made sense in his twisted mind. But Melissa wasn't buying it. Not anymore. He was trying to seduce her back into the illusion. He had built an illusion of control, of power, of love. But Melissa was no longer the naive woman who believed his lies. David, ever the manipulator, ordered drinks for both of them. But Melissa noticed something, a subtle movement, a slight shift in his hand as he dropped something into her glass. A chill ran down her spine. David's mask was slipping, revealing his true nature. A man who would do anything to keep his lies alive, even if it meant forcing Melissa into submission. Melissa's words cut through the tension as the undercover officers moved in. David realized too late that he had been caught. He bolted for the elevator, but before he could get far, he was tackled by officers, taken down in front of tourists. The glass Melissa had been offered contained more than just alcohol. It was laced with zolpidem, a strong sedative. The dose mixed with alcohol was lethal enough to incapacitate her, making it easier for David to stage an accident. His plan was to take her to the rooftop pool area and after hours stage her drowning. As that chows settled, Nicole stepped out of Theven. The weight of the entire ordeal was reflected in her face, a mix of grief, anger, and the beginning of healing. David Tan's arrest was only the beginning. The investigation would uncover a criminal network that spanned 5 countries, and more victims than anyone imagined. David Tan's device revealed a sprawling criminal network, one that stretched across 6 countries in Southeast Asia connected to 3 deaths: Yuki Nakamura, Paisei, and Lin Yuan, a Vietnamese woman killed in 2019. David had left a trail of destruction in his wake. 4 active relationships were also uncovered. Relationships that included Nicole and Melissa. David's total insurance fraud amounted to over $2.4 million, the sum of his sinister shame. Each woman was a pawn in his twisted game. For months later, the trial began. David Tan was charged with multiple counts of bigamy, 3 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. David Tan was found guilty on all counts. The judges sentenced him to life imprisonment met with the possibility of parole. An additional 25 years for fraud and conspiracy were tacked onto his sentence, and he was ordered to pay restitution to the families of all of his victims. Melissa's testimony was a powerful moment in the trial. Her courage in facing the man who had ruined her life and countless others was a testament to her strength. And in that moment, she became more than a victim. She became a symbol of survival. 6 months later, Melissa returned to Manila, the wounds of the past still fresh. But her journey had only just begun. Struggling with PTSD and trust issues, she began attending therapy and support groups. Slowly, she rebuilt her life. She founded Protect and Empower, an advocacy group aimed at helping victims of romance scams. She shared her story in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, her words a warning to others. Now, she speaks at immigration seminars, warning about international marriage fraud. Recently, Melissa accepted a nursing position at Singapore General Hospital, but this time, she was returning to Singapore on her terms, not for a man, but for herself. Nicole, too, began her healing journey. After the annulment was granted, she underwent counseling for trauma, reconnecting with her family in Sydney. She found strength in the support of those who had been there for her from the beginning. Nicole started a blog, Surviving the Unthinkable, documenting her healing process. She became a volunteer with a women's crisis center, finding purpose in helping others. Slowly, she began dating again, cautiously taking steps toward trust. Over time, Melissa and Nicole formed an unlikely friendship, one that neither of them could have predicted, but both deeply valued. They met monthly for coffee when Melissa visited Singapore, a symbol of their shared healing. The ring that once symbolized betrayal was now a part of her life. Melissa had it melted down and redesigned. What way since a symbol of her broken dreams became something new, a symbol of survival. She created a friendship necklace, one for herself, one for Nicole. From a symbol of betrayal to a symbol of survival and sisterhood. Their case didn't just change their lives, it'll do policy changes in Singapore, including new requirements for foreign marriage registration, enhanced background checks for insurance policies, and a regional database tracking suspected romance fraud criminals. Thanks to their courage, it's estimated that 3 to 4 additional victims who had been targeted by David were saved from the same fate. To understand how David Tan's deception fit into the larger picture of romance fraud, we turn to criminal psychologist Amanda Foster. She specializes in psychological tactics used by romance fraud predators. Dr. Foster's words were a stark reminder of how crucial it was for people to recognize the signs of romance fraud before it's too late. The case of David Tan didn't just affect Nicole and Melissa. It sent shockwaves through a criminal network that spanned across Southeast Asia. But their bravery in coming forward would go to save countless others. As the investigation continued to uncover even darker truths about David's operations, to women, to marriage certificates, one predator, but in the end, truth and courage prevailed over deception and evil. Melissa Fernandez and Nicole Hartman walked into David Tan's trap, but they walked out together, not as victims, but as survivors who saved each other's lives. If this story impacted you, please share it. Someone in your life might need to hear this. Warning: subscribe to this channel for more true crime stories that educate and empower. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. What red flag stood out to you most in David's behavior? Let's help each other recognize these warning signs. And if you or someone you know is experiencing relations manipulation or fraud, please reach out to the resources listed in the description below. Remember, the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in love. Stay vigilant, stay connected to your people, and never ignore your instincts.